Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. This is our first artist talk of the winter term, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Leah Wilson to our gallery and to all of you, and her really phenomenal installation work. And it's been a really fun time for me to get to know Leah and her work, so especially the piece here in the middle of Constructing Water. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Leah, and you'll get to hear from her, because that's why you're here. So thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. Are you all artists? Yeah. Is anybody here not an artist?
We're all artists in some way.
In some way? Okay, good. I just wanted to get a sense of who I'm talking to here. So I like to start with these slides right here, because this is the foundation of so much of what I do. I started running whitewater, I think, when I was about 12 years old. And I started teaching whitewater kayaking, I don't know, over a decade ago. And I did that for about 10 years. And so what that gave me was the ability to really understand the area that I lived. I knew the geography of where I lived by the watersheds. I kayaked almost every day, and so I knew the water, I knew the rivers by feel. The rivers feel different, they taste different, they sound different. And then teaching whitewater kayaking, that usually happened on the same stretch of river. And so I would be on the same stretch of river day after day after day. And I started to be able to see all the small changes that happened in the environment. And then I started teaching environmental science classes, outdoor ed school in the same area. And I would go hiking with kids. They were mainly fourth graders. And we would do the same hike twice a week. And I would talk about the same plants to them twice a week. And it sounds like it would be a really boring thing to do because it's really repetitive. But it really taught me to see the smallest little changes that were happening. And so I've taken those experiences into everything that you've seen here in the gallery, all the work that I make since then. This is a piece that I did I completed it in, I believe it was 2007. And I was living in this small town in Nevada City, California, which is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And my local watershed was coming up for FERC relicensing. That's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and what they do is every 30 to 50 years, I think this was a 50-year relicensing project that they had, they talk to every agency that has anything to do with the entire water system, and so that would be all of the energy agencies, fishing and wildlife, recreation. There were Native American groups that had a stake in this, the local community. And they tried to come together to come up with a plan for the entire water system for the next 50 years, so it's quite a huge task. And I sat in on a lot of these meetings to really learn what was going on, and I was quite dismayed because this river that I loved so much and that I knew so well by feel, it was all being reduced to numbers, and they seemed to really take the life out of everything. So I did this piece, which was very different from the work that I had been doing up to that time, which was much more expressive, that dealt with water. And I chose 4 locations on the river that had strong personal significance to me. And I visited those 4 locations every single month. And I took a series of underwater photographs, and I sampled points on all of those photographs, and then I averaged all of the RGB values. And that's how I arrived at all of these colors. This right here is, this row up here would be one location, starting the first month that I did this, and going through an entire year. Second location, third location, fourth location. The bottom row is the average color that I came up with those RGB values of that month for the river. And then I ended up here at the end of the average color of the river for the entire year from those 4 locations. And I did this out of cynicism, and I just continued doing it, and at the end of it, when I got it on the wall and I actually saw what I did, it stunned me because it was a lot more beautiful than what I had anticipated I was going to be doing. And I didn't know what to do with it from that point in time, so I continued doing the same type of work that I had been doing, but it sat in my brain. Then I moved here to Oregon in 2008, and this is a friend that I met from whitewater kayaking. She was getting her PhD at Oregon State in soil sciences. And so I would go with her when she was collecting the data for her dissertation, her thesis. And she was studying the water in the wetlands. She had a few locations outside of Eugene. This is just south of Corvallis at a place called Finley. It's a wildlife refuge for birds. And she would go out there studying how much water was in the ground, all the groundwater. She had set up piezometers to be able to measure that. So what she's doing here is there's a tube that goes down the ground into a little basin, and she had draw this line with an erasable marker and put it down into the tube, and then pull it out again, and then she could tell how much water was in the ground by how much marker was left on the tape measure. So I followed her around and just asked her a ton of questions about how she collected data, how she processed the data, what that meant to her with what she was seeing, and learned a lot about the scientific process that way. These 2 fields are 2 adjacent fields in Finley. The one on the left is, it's a farmed field. It was a duck hunting field. I think it still is a duck hunting field. And the owners of that field decided that they wanted to restore that field so it would resemble more of the native wetland prairie. The right side is a native wetland prairie field that is right next to the duck hunting field. So I was really interested in the way that the colors differed between those 2 adjacent fields. And I did a project where I went out to those 2 fields every month for a year, so this was another year-long project. And I tried to figure out what the most prevalent colors in both of the fields were, and I arranged the colors in my paintings from top to bottom, from the most prevalent to the least prevalent, and I came up with this project right here. So what you're seeing is each one of these panels is 1 month. The colors that are represented on the left-hand side are from the farmed field, and the colors on the right-hand side are from the wetland prairie. And again, I was really stunned in the difference of the 2 fields and the color variation that I got during the year, because in those wetland prairies, you really can't see what's going on. You can't tell what the plants are doing because so many of them are so small until you actually go out into the field. And there is so much life in there. This right here, this is a fall one. These are rose hips. Those bright colors are coming from rose hips that were in there. This panel is a little bit different from a lot of the other ones because they did a prescribed burn, and that's in the native wetland prairie right there. And so you see a lot of these dark colors that are coming out. But after the prairie flooded, then in the spring, it was extremely vibrant. So the fires did a lot to really bring out a lot of the life and the color. In 2012, I started working at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. This is, it's right outside of Blue River, so it's about 60 miles east of here. And it is a forest that it's about 16,000 acres. It encompasses one entire drainage. It is administered by Oregon State, the Willamette National Forest, and is funded through different research agencies and the National Science Foundation. So This place is really where my work has resided since I went there in 2012 for a residency. And now they're starting to call me an episodic, what is it? I've got the name somewhere. I think it's like an episodic permanent resident of the place because I just won't go away. This is the location that I did my first project. It's from a bridge. The painting that came from it is right there, that project on the far wall right there. What I was doing there was I was looking at the creek and the sky at the same time. And I wanted to know the relationship between the two of them, if there was a color relationship that I would be able to map. So since I was mapping colors similarly to what I was doing in those other projects, which were color mapping projects, I wanted to really reference mapping. So I took these photographs and I separated all of the colors into kind of basic colored chunks and literally drew lines so they would resemble a topographical map. The first one, the one over there, was done in January. This one is from June. So those are the only two I did. Moving from there, I did a project called Rot. And that was an invitational project first. So many different artists participated in this. This is Dr. Mark Harmon. He is from OSU. He's now retired, and he started a 200-year research project studying how rot affects the forest. So he took a group of us out to the forest, talked about rot. I never knew how extensive rot is and how important it is. This is from his plot, one of his many plots, where I really don't know what's going on in here, but they shoved these PVC pipes into these rotting logs, and they're able to measure something from here. And then these are some photos that I took of rotting logs. One of the things that really intrigued me by doing this project is that I learned that trees actually support more life when they're dead than when they were alive, and that's because of all of the insects, the fungus, and all the things that the fungus and the insects supports. They find their way in there and make a life in here. So I don't want to go there yet. So the project that I did is this one right here. That's my rot project. And what I did with that one is I wandered around the forest until I found a fungus that really called out to me. The fungus was about this big, and I took photographs of it using a macro lens. And when I looked at these photographs on my computer after I took them, it looked like a little flat fungus. And in the photographs, they actually had so much topography. They really resembled a mountain range, as if you were like up in the sky in an airplane looking down onto this mountain range. And I took that idea, and I used, I think I ended up with 7 or 8 layers of color. And I separated the colors into these different layers on the computer, and then I hand cut them. So that whole piece is watercolor paper that's hand cut and then glued. From there, I went back into the forest, and I wanted to work with water again. So the first project that I did it at 3 different locations. They're all gauging stations up at the H.J. Andrews Forest. And this is the one on the left is at what they call Watershed 1. They don't use the most creative names for these places. But when I went out there, there's a gauging station that I was going to be placing a rock, that rock over there, actually. That's my white rock that I use as a reference rock. And there was this graduate student out there, and he was had a whole array of piezometers that he had put up the watershed. So this is the same sort of thing that my friend Sarah in the wetland prairie was looking at. He was also looking at the groundwater next to the creek. And so I was out there with my white rock. He was out there with his piezometer. And then I found these two photos. This is of me and of this student here looking at his piezometer, and I realized, well, we're actually doing kind of similar things. So the project was ambient. The 3 locations, these are from 3 different watersheds. The colors taken on the top panels were the colors that I got from my white rock, so that was my standard colors. So I wouldn't be getting any of the colors that were coming from the bottom of the creek bed. It was all color that was coming directly from the color of the water or reflections on the water. The bottom ones here are the colors that I got from the creek that were surrounding the white rock. And what I did is I went out to these 3 different locations 3 times in one day. So this is all one day's change right here in the way that the light changed. I went to watershed 1 first, and I took a round of, let me just check to make sure that I have it right here. I took a photograph every minute for 9 minutes, and then the colors that I got from there are represented in kind of one chunk there at the top left. I did the same thing for the creek bed, and then each watershed. And I was really surprised at the difference in the colors that I got, because these 3 watersheds are all within about 1 mile from each other. The colors here, these very yellow colors, are coming from a watershed that's, it's a very built environment from the scientists. They built this concrete basin that collects the water that's coming down from a pretty steep watershed, and it goes into this basin, this concrete basin, and it just sits there, and it collects a bunch of just goopy sediment down at the bottom. And so the water in there, because it was sitting and it was stagnant for so long, took on this kind of putrid yellow color to it. This watershed 1 area is a steep watershed in an old growth forest, so that water is pretty clear. The middle one is from Lookout Creek, which is the main creek that runs through the Andrews Forest, and it's also very clear, but this was from a really deep pool. That deep pool was able to produce these really beautiful aqua colors. So moving from there, I decided I wanted to do another project that was going to be more extensive as far as time goes. Really looking at the color in one place in one watershed. So this is from this project right here, these 4 paintings. That one's called Solstices and Equinoxes. I went to an even steeper watershed that's in an old growth forest. This one's called Watershed 2. And Tim, who's sitting right here, would come out there with me. We would sit out there, we'd get out there before the sun rose on the solstices and equinoxes, and we stayed out there the entire day until after the sun set. So I set up my camera, put my white rock right there in the middle of the watershed. So that's a white rock right there. There's this little log that is right before it that helps cause a pool right here. This is a little bridge, so we have this little bridge that we can cross the creek. And then I'll show you some photos a little bit later about what it looked like over on the other side. So I went out there every 10 minutes to take a photograph. And from each one of those photographs, I took 40 color samples. And I don't want to go there yet. And so each one of these columns right here is 40 colors, and each one of the columns is one of those 1-minute intervals right there. So this would be sunrise, and this is sunset right here. And these white bands come from the colors that I was picking up with the rock. So that was my constant again, so I can tell what was going on with the water alone versus what was going on around the water. The way that I was able to get the colors, the most accurate colors, was using a color checker. So Tim would go out there and he would hold this color checker out there on this, we took a walking stick and he attached it with, I think, a binder clip. And he held it out there in front of the rock. I would take one photo with the color checker, and then we would move the color checker away, and then I would take another photograph right after that. And so every single photograph was color checked, so I could have a consistent color throughout the whole thing. What I realized pretty quickly is that if I'm going to be going out and taking photographs from sunrise to sunset, that's a huge difference in light that's happening through the day. And so sunrise and sunset obviously are pretty dark. The middle of the day is usually fairly light. And my camera couldn't handle one consistent setting. So I had to do a lot of corrections in order to be able to get what ended up being an absolute value of the color change throughout the day. So it can also have a really consistent color, light change throughout the entire project. So there was a ton of math involved with doing this. Each one of the minutes produced color swatches like this. And so all of these paintings were made just from these color swatches. This would be just one column right there. And I had no idea what was going to be produced. I had to really trust in my ability to be able to come up with a system that would produce anything in the first place. I went out there for a year, obviously, because it was all in the solstices and equinoxes, to take these photographs. And then it took me about another year to do these paintings, and I had to really, really trust in everything that it was going to actually turn out to be something that anybody would want to see, because I couldn't tell what the composition was. This is another view of that same location. So this is the gauging station right here. If you're looking upstream from the gauging station, it's just very rugged. It's an old growth forest. But looking downstream, there's something completely different going on there. Everything is so constructed, like I was telling you about with Watershed 3, by the scientists for science. So there are all of these little tubes that come out here. There are a bunch of little sensors that come out. They're taking readings in this gauging station constantly. And they move this whole series of pulleys, which then turns that wheel, and that creates these drawings for scientists. So this thing is constantly drawing a graph. So it was out there collecting data at the same time that I was collecting the data in the same place. One of the scientists that I work with then created these graphs for me, so we can see what was happening scientifically on the same days that I was collecting all of the information for these paintings. And then what I found, I didn't know before, this top row right here is the precipitation for the entire year. And I don't know if you can see it from way back there, but there are these little dotted lines, and those are on the solstices and equinoxes when I was out there, so it shows the precise day of when I was sitting out there. This spike right here, that is the biggest rain event of the entire year, and so we were sitting out in pouring rain for the winter solstice, and it was just incredible. And that's what produced that painting there in the back. And you can tell what's happening, and you can tell this story, this spike story, by a few different things that are happening in that painting. That white rock, so those white bands, they start out pretty clear, pretty white over on the left-hand side if you're accounting for the darkness of the sunrise. And then as they move across the panels over to the right-hand side, they become more and more yellow, and then they start to become more brown. And that's because the water was becoming more and more turbid throughout the day because it was raining so hard, and it was picking up all of the sediment that was coming down from the stream. All of the little white specks that are happening in those paintings, that's coming from a bunch of foam that was created because the water was rushing down so fast and then collecting in the pool at the bottom, creating these little foam muffin things that would float past. So that painting is really a painting of a storm. The next painting over here was done in spring, that spring equinox. That was, it was a fairly clear day, so we get more of a consistent color going across for the white rock. The colors in there are a lot more red and yellow. Those are coming from the creek bed, and there's a lot of red rock at the bottom of the creek bed over there. Moving through over here to the summer, that painting becomes a little bit more brown. Sediment started to collect down at the bottom of the creek, so I wasn't able to see a lot of the reds that were happening before at the bottom of the creek bed. I'm also starting to pick up some of the color from the reflection from the trees. So down at the bottom, and then there's one little kind of aberration over there, this little white speck that's coming from the light that's shining on the creek. Since it is such a steep creek, there's only direct sunlight for a very short period of time during the day, and that's represented by those very bright white columns. This is fall, and in fall, since it hadn't rained for a very long time at that point in time, it was just thick brown goop at the bottom of the creek bed, but the trees were changing colors, and so I was able to pick up some of the reflection of the yellow trees, and that's what that yellow column is. Okay, so more of that, the gauging station. Right here too, it's a little drain. So the creek has a little drain in there, and that goes down into the gauging station so they can, I don't know what they're testing with that, but it really struck me that in order to be able to observe something, then you have to change it. So the act of observing changes what you're looking at. And the same was, it was true for me also with the camera. The act of observing it with the camera, I needed to change what was actually happening in order to be able to get that light variation that I was talking about, to get the color variation that I was talking about. And so what was true became a really malleable thing. And that was really surprising to me, because when I went into this project, I was thinking that I was going to be doing something that was as objective as I could make it. I wanted to take myself out of it as much as possible. But in order to be the most objective that I could be, I found out that I had to make a ton of subjective choices. And so I started to really give up on the idea of anything really being able to be an objective view of what's going on. You really have to start to edit. So if you want to highlight something that's going on, you really want to bring that up, you have to decide how you're going to edit that and the choices that you're going to make in order to eliminate other things. And so again, objectivity becomes a really malleable thing. So with that idea of construction and being able to observe things, I really wanted to go deeper into that idea. This is part of the constructed environment of a river. So this is gate from a dam, and this is where I was living over in Nevada City. So going back to the beginning when I first started talking about kayaking, I was able to kayak throughout a lot of the year because of the dam. It looked like when I was out there, it looked like I was out in the wilderness, but it was actually an extremely built and regulated environment. This is another view of that dam. If you walk down those stairs, which is a really disconcerting thing to do because you know that on the other side of that wall, there's a big wall of water. There's a way to get down there's this little ladder that goes down, and you can go down to where the the river starts over there. I don't have a photograph of this because it didn't turn out very well, but there's a faucet. There's a literal faucet with this, it's like this little handle, but it's kind of big, where you can literally turn the river on or off at that point, which just, it just seems so absurd because you don't think about this when you're sitting by the river, kayaking a river.
This is on the Yuba?
This is on the Yuba. Do you know where the Yuba is?
Yeah, I've been to that.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, so if you just go upstream, it's Spalding Reservoir over there, and that's where it all starts. Yeah, it's nuts. And up above that too, it's if you ever have a chance, go up there, it's amazing. So I wanted to take that whole idea of the idea that the river can be such a special, amazing, natural, wild place. It's a wild and scenic river below this, yet it's so not wild. And that's when I came up with the idea to do this piece that's in the middle. That's called Constructing Water. I took one of the images that I took back at the beginning when I was doing the average colors of the South Yuba River. I wanted to bring that experience back into my present day experience and my present day watershed so I can get to know it a little bit better. That took me 2 years to make. That again was done all by faith, really, in my ability to work through a whole process because I wasn't able to see that composition as I was making it. I would cut each layer of Duralar individually. There are 16 individual cut layers there, and when I would finish a layer, I have a very small studio. I would just put it underneath a sheet on the table that I was using to cut, and then I would put the next layer up above that and just start to cut. So I actually did not see this piece until about, and I only kind of sort of saw it, until a couple of weeks before this show opened when Tim and I set this up in our house with these big, huge legs. And I could see that it actually did start to work. Ellen back there, she was amazing because she allowed me to install this thing really not knowing if it was going to work at all. And when we were installing it, it did not work. So I was having problems with this because using the Duralar, it's very reflective. It worked in my house with the lights off, but once we got it in here and we have all of those halogen lights all around, all that we could see was the reflection of the halogen lights on there, so it was just this big white piece of plastic that was up here. It was extremely stressful. Yeah, that would be great. It does look better with the lights off. So you can see more of what's going on over there with the lights off. So thank you, Ellen, for working through this with me. And I'm really happy to be able to bring this out to you all here. This is a work in progress. It's actually not meant to be seen in a gallery, but it's really nice to be able to see it in a gallery so I can see what's happening. It's meant to go out to different sites over on the Mackenzie where we are constructing the river in different ways over there. So I wanted to bring it to dam sites, and I wanted to bring it to restoration sites, and have that juxtaposition of something that was that started from the more wild water, and really putting it and highlighting the fact that our wild water is actually very constructed water. So one of the ways that I'm going to be doing this is taking this cube right here. This is a steel and plexiglass cube that is 6 feet by 6 feet. It has wheels on it, so we can bring this to different locations. I'm still scoping out the location that we're going to bring this thing to. It's called Gray Space, and I want to end what I'm talking about here with you today, talking about gray space, because this has been such an amazing experience for me. Gray space is the cube. Gray space is a group of people. You may recognize possibly a couple of the people in this photograph. One of them is back here. That's Kathleen Caprario. She is actually the person that first got us all together. We didn't know each other a little over 2 years ago. Kathleen wanted to get to know certain artists a little bit better, so she sent out an invitation to a group of artists. She had no idea what was going on. Maybe you wanted to talk about this a little bit more. And we showed up. All of us have an interest in place, about this specific place where we're living, and all of our art that we make relates to Oregon. This is Michael Boonster right here. He is one of our gray space people. Lee, does anybody have Lee as an instructor at all? Nobody has Lee? Okay, he's not here, but he's another one. Right here. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. This is Andy. So if you haven't gone over there to see that, it's over in that building, right?
In building 10 in the atrium gallery of building.
Yes, so if you haven't seen that, definitely go see that. He does amazing work. He's working with the wolves here in Oregon, OR7, so I believe that's one of his pieces over there. So one of the great things about this group of people is that we've come together really to grant each other permission to take risks. So, we get to bounce ideas off of each other. We have a really good time doing this. And then while we're doing this, one of the things that we talk about all the time is how can we get this out to places, our art out to places that we don't need institutions. We don't have to ask permission. We can just go take it out there. The first project that we did was with Renee Couture's work, and unfortunately I don't have an image of her work right now. We thought the most interesting place to be able to take work out that usually doesn't have artwork in it would be to rest areas. So we went to a rest area that was over by Roseburg, and that's what we were doing here. This is in the rest area in Roseburg. We rolled this thing out there, and we put it right in front of the bathrooms. She set her work up in there. She talked to everybody who would come by. There were a lot of people who were engaging with the work. They were just thrilled that there was something really interesting going on out there. She had some great conversations, and then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this man comes over. He looked very concerned, didn't know what to do with this. He was the caretaker of this rest area, called us supervisor. Supervisor didn't know what to do with it, and he shut it down. So he made us leave. We tried to progress with our project, taking it to rest areas, but it turned into this big bureaucratic mess. And the decision that finally came down is they didn't want us to start a precedent, so we're not allowed to go to rest areas. So we're taking it to other places. Kathleen?
I had mine in a rest
You
area.
did.
We had to leave it on the trailer. We couldn't take it off and place it on something. It had to stay on the trailer back. That's how we got around that one.
Yes, yes. And I did a project in there this summer. This was over at the Halt Center. It was up for a week over in the plaza. I did this with Kate Ali. And we were dealing with the idea of fires and the transformation that can occur with fires. So Kate built the structure that goes around our gray space cube. We burned it, which was quite fun. We did that in her yard, and took it out there. My contribution to this are all of these pieces. They're wax pieces that are dipped in resin, and those shapes come from nodules that grow on some of the plants that are the first plants that grow after a fire. So they're nitrogen-fixing nodules. Those plants come in, they grow these roots with these nodules, and then that provides a really fertile soil for the forest to start to grow. There are also these roots that I gathered from the forest that are in there to represent that. We had plants, these plants here, that we planted. We planted more plants every single day that it was out there. We chose native plants to plant in there that would start to occur after a fire. So that is gray space. And that's all I have for you. So thank you. Does anybody have questions?
Last year, I was still in high school, and my teacher took us to the H.J. Andrews Forest. And before we went, she was actually talking about your artwork, and it was really cool to like end up coming here the next year and seeing you here.
Oh, that's awesome. Who was your teacher?
What's her name again? Miss Saint at Elmira High School.
I have no idea who that is. That's wonderful. Oh, that makes me really happy. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming, everybody.